Okay, so hopefully we should have some patrons hopping on in the next few minutes. So this is going to be the first immersive railroading development stream. And yeah, this should be interesting. So I have recently quit my job and am planning on doing immersive railroading pretty much for the next few months and some other side gigs. So I'm planning on streaming once a week, showing the progress I'm making on the mod. Hopefully getting better at these sort of introductions and getting back into this sort of public speaking role again. But yeah, I'm going to have a lot of time to work on immersive railroading, and I want to get a bunch of feedback from the community as soon as possible. And part of that is through Patron. So just before I dive too deep into the contents, and while some folks are still hopping on, I will show off the Patron Dashboard. Anyone can publicly see this this dashboard. This shows what's currently going on with the mod, what's on effectively the top things on my priority list, and this is controllable via Patron. So if you're a patron and you've given Patron a day or so to sort stuff out behind the scenes, you can click this Login with Patron button and vote on these different tasks. So at the moment I'm working on headlights, the track permission system. I haven't made as much progress this week as I would like, but I will be doing more as time goes on. I've made a ton of progress on working reversers and animated/interactable parts in the rolling stock. Have not started on the turntable concept yet. Recently got some votes coming in on that. Looks like some patrons are starting to file in here and there. Let's see. And I'll probably at some point start playing with a dynamic cargo visualization. I've thought about that a little bit, but I haven't really dove too deep into that. So I think the best place to start is for me to check out what's been going on with the new control system. So let's check out that branch. See, I was working. Actually, I will do that in a minute. First, I'm actually going to show the lighting progress that I've made. So let me boot up this Minecraft instance, and I've actually got another one I can boot up at the same time. So lighting is actually a fairly hard problem to solve in modded Minecraft. And it's one of those things where I could probably do some neat hacks myself, and I'm looking into a few, but using something like Optifine to do the majority of the work kind of makes sense. I'm not a huge fan of how Optifine kind of rewrites how the game functions, but for something as complex as dynamic lighting, I think it makes a lot more sense to just go with something that already works. Say we've got a few more folks on. We've got Larky and Admiral in the chat. So you can see the second window starting up. So what I'm going to show you first, and hopefully the frame rate's pretty decent. I haven't actually streamed on this computer in quite some time. And YouTube's giving me a few warnings. So again, this is the first stream. It's going to be a little bit choppy, but should get better, a little bit more interactive with the patrons in the chat over time. Let's see. So the way I've implemented this lighting system is that the train takes a look, or the locomotive takes a look forward, and any rail blocks it finds, and yeah, I need probably to get a better graphics card at this point. It looks ahead, sees what track is available, and dynamically changes the light level on the track. And yeah, this frame rate is not fantastic, so I'll definitely try and make that better for the next stream. If I can start moving along, and you see the light moves along with it. This isn't perfect. It does kill the frame rate a little bit more, but it is a viable option as a fallback if Optifines does not exist. Because, I mean, Optifine or not, this is going to be a fairly performance-intensive feature. So in all likelihood, this will be an opt-in feature. A lot of the features that I'm going to show today are definitely going to start off as opt-in features and be improved and added onto over time. Yeah. So let's hop over here. So it's not great. It doesn't really spread the light out that much. It's not going to, like, if I place blocks alongside the track, it doesn't really update it. Like, it's not a super strong light. It's not as good as I'd like, but it's better than nothing. So I still need to do the actual visuals of having parts of the locomotive look a little bit lit, but at this point I'm just in the prototype phase. So I guess what I'm showing you right now is a few different prototypes. This is another one, depending on if I have this instance set up correctly. So I believe, if I've done everything right, this one should be using Optifine. Oop. Come on. I should have closed the other Minecraft instance first. Hang on a sec. Oh dear, let's see if I crash. Okay. Close this window. There we go. Okay. That's better. Okay. So you can see, because I hacked Optifine a little bit, so the light is based on the passenger lighting. So it's kind of a weird thing, but I put in a little hack just for performance sake. So I didn't add any new lighting entities. I didn't do anything actually special other than set it so that if there's a player riding the entity, there's a hack behind the scenes that has Optifine turn on dynamic lighting for that entity. And as you can see, it's not perfect, but it's actually not bad. And the performance, yeah, frame rate wise, is dramatically better. So I'm kind of leaning toward Optifine as the primary, and looking at potentially doing track block updates as a fallback. Though again, I'm still not sold on the whole performance of that. Let's see. Admiral is asking, would the headlight distance be configurable? That is a good question. I think so. Again, this is still very much in the technical proof of concept, so I'll be posting screenshots in the patron-only chat in Immersive Railroading over time and seeing how stuff goes. It should be interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on the lighting initially, just mostly wanted to show the initial progress, as that's the top thing on the board right now. Let's see. So, it's progress. But definitely still it needs a lot of tweaking. So what I'd really like to start talking about and looking at is what's possible with the new control and interaction system. So this will take me just a minute to check out that other branch. Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to hop over to, it's not in-game interactions, I actually merged that into the Start Advanced Controls. Okay. Student Team Effects and Reverser, yeah, I think that is... I think this has the new stuff integrated. Yeah, so this has the prototype reverser. So I also need to check out a different universal mod core. Okay, this is going to be advanced control support. And I played around with this a little bit, but I actually don't think I've shown the most recent version. So okay, so the command key is the same one as there we go. Just gonna type a quick message. The command key is the same one for streaming as it is for other stuff. Can you guys still see what I'm... Let's see. It's thinking about it. Okay. Hopefully we'll start seeing some updates on the screen. Okay, cool. Thanks, Evan. Alright, so what I've done is I've switched my local development environment over to this other branch, giving it a sec to figure its stuff out. And I should be able to boot this up in my test world and give it a go. Okay, cool. Yeah, I've got to change that key binding. Again, I haven't streamed in quite some time, so the first one or two of these is going to be a little bit choppy. Looks like we got some more people filtering in. So what I've shown so far is just some of the basics on what I've been prototyping with lighting, taking a look at just relying on Optifine to do most of the grunt work, or doing some of the hacking it myself and trying to work around Minecraft's lighting engine. Doing visuals like making parts appear brighter, that's not that bad, or adding a light, like a sort of visual light cone, that's not that bad, but actually doing actual real lighting in the game is something that is quite a bit harder to accomplish. So we'll see. Alright, so what should happen now is I can come over here to, let's see, which track? I actually want to pop this off and switch to a different locomotive. So advanced controls in my mind mean two different things. One is controls you can actually interact with, and the other is, yeah, controls you can actually interact with, and more realistic boiler mechanics, more realistic controls. So as you can see over here, the user interface has not actually been updated yet, because I'm still, again, in the prototype phase for a lot of this, but we now have brake, reverser, and throttle. And all of these things do have keybinds. And there's currently a bug where reverser and throttle are chained together. Okay, this is not doing what I would expect. Hang on. I might need to merge some stuff in. Give me a moment. This might take me a moment. Got too many things in there at the moment. Got advanced controls. That's, when did I merge? Oh, so I merged advanced controls into in-game interactions. That's right. So I've got a bunch of stuff I'm prototyping at once, so sometimes I forget where exactly the work should be happening. So, sorry, give this just a moment to boot up. So, and if you guys have any questions on anything that's on the board or any features that you want to see, put those in chat and we can talk about them as I'm waiting for stuff to boot up and happen. So, it feels good to be doing this sort of software engineering again and computer science. It's been a little bit since I've really had the time to just sit down and hack on something, and I think a lot of is going to come out of this. I've really the stuff you see today, I've really only been working on and off for about a week, and at the pace I'm going, a lot of stuff can happen. I'm also working on a bunch of stuff with Dark to get some other other advances going as far as controls and support for more esoteric rolling stock. So there's a lot. For those of you familiar with immersive railroading releases every 6 months, that's going to change. What is hopefully going to happen is releases every month and a half. Don't necessarily want to commit to it at this point, but I think I'm going to be able to get a few features in, get them wrapped up, and get a release out instead of trying to bundle a bunch of stuff up and then take a bunch of time and release it, which just adds to the whole chaos of the thing. So if you were part of immersive railroading back when it first started several years ago now, I was putting out an update every couple weeks, and I broke stuff a little bit more often, but A, I have more tests and more infrastructure now, and B, stuff happened a lot quicker, and I got feedback a lot faster. So it was good for me, good for the modelers, and I think it was good for the community. So I just want to double check in the stream chat. Okay, cool. So yeah, you guys can still definitely hear me. That's good. Okay, so enough talking. Let's see the cool new stuff. So, hey, look at that. And if you look on the side, I just realized I'm pointing to my screen that you can't actually see. The brake lever is both the lever in game is moving and this part of the user interface is also updating. So I can take off the brake, and the hitbox is a little bit weird. The hitbox so the initial hitbox is just this right here. But when you move it, you still have to click here. So I'm going to be working on improving that. It'll be a little bit funky, but I don't think it's going to be that bad. For things like the reverser, it's a lot easier. So reverser is currently in neutral, so I can pull the throttle all the way, and it's just not going to do anything. If I push that forward a little bit, start nudging on the throttle a little bit, get a little bit more. Here we go. We're starting to move. A little bit more. And grab the throttle and put that back down. And now we're just coasting, and I can actually pull that back to neutral, put the brake on. You have to pull it in a direction away from it. I'm still working on a lot of the interaction. This is the fact that I can select stuff while I'm going around curves doing all sorts of stuff is progress enough for me at the moment. So I can pull the reverser back, and there we go. So the coolest part about this is not just the fact that it works in the first place, it's the fact that this is, I feel like it might be a little bit preemptive, but it should be almost trivial for the modelers to interact with. So I have Blender open at the moment, and I'm trying to move to a better vantage point. And I've shown this in text, but this will be hopefully fairly instructional. Let me move this over. And so here, oh come on, why aren't you letting me select stuff? A Blender expert I am not. There we go. Okay, so if I come over here, shift move, there we go. So here we have the throttle, and technically the rotation point should be here. So I messed that up a little bit. Rotation point should be here. But this effectively is the rotation point. So let me change this over here to throttle. So this object right here, this is the throttle. And then all you have to do is have another group somewhere in the model. Usually I'd recommend this be a bolt or something like that, where it figures out this is the long axis right here. So that's the one it rotates around. And this is the information about what it should rotate and how it should rotate. So this is throttle. So rotate the throttle object around this long axis and start at 0 degrees and go to -20 degrees. So this is always going to be the initial position. So what I could do is either separate out some of these pieces right here to be the center of the groups. Like this would be like technically this piece right here, what I'm kind of mousing over, the center cylinder, that should be throttle rot 20. Throttle rotation negative 20 instead. Alternatively, I could just make this like a piece of transparent stuff and move it over here, which would also work. But really, all the modelers will need to do is have a name in a group for the rotation point. So this means making valves work isn't that bad. And if we come down here, I just named this group, go to break. So it's technically part of the piping object, which is fine, but it's also flagged as train brake rotation negative 90. And you could always say, you could you could in Blender rotate this to be facing wherever the off, effectively you always start your object at the off position. And then you specify which direction it should rotate, so either positive or negative a certain number of degrees. Now we take a look over here. This is the reverser. And this group down here, which I just threw in here, really there should be like a cylinder, and that would be the pin that locks it in place, that it rotates around. This would be reverser rotation, whichever direction you want. And again, the values and the scaling is all very much work in progress, but hopefully I should have a release, or a test build for modelers to start playing with. And I'm talking to some of the modelers who did the original models in IR to update some of their models potentially for the next release so that in-game controls work. And before you start thinking, oh man, that looks cumbersome, or hey, I'm used to these keybind controls and that's what works for me, I'm planning on keeping the defaults, all the default interactions the same. I'm hoping that like I'll have this stuff enabled by default, but I want to keep the key bindings in-game unless you choose a very realistic immersion level. So one of the big things I need to do is start work on the configuration so that you can choose an immersion level that suits your needs. Some people don't want to have keybinds. They want everything to be perfectly interactable inside the cab. You see your water level in the water glasses. I forget who suggested. I think it might have... I don't want to... one of the modelers who... I wish I could remember which one it was off the top of my head, but they suggested that like we have cargo fill levers, we could also have fluid fill levels and scale a group inside of here so you could actually see the active water and steam levels inside of the locomotive visible right here. So I want to get to the point where immersive railroading can be run without any key controls or any additional user interface. This isn't going to happen in the next release, but I want to start taking steps toward that. I also want to keep it as simple as it is today because it's really easy to get into the game as it stands. I don't really want to change the initial experience of someone just opening up immersive railroading for the first time and having to learn about how a steam locomotive actually really works behind the scenes. Yeah, and Admiral has mentioned in the chat. I do think it was, yeah, I think that was you, Admiral, that suggested that. But I really want to start enabling the ability for modelers to really dive into the immersion. And the best part about this is now that I've figured out how to do this in the first place, adding this for all sorts of stuff is super easy. So one thing, I believe it was Admiral brought up, is the ability to have windows that you can open, either slide open or rotate open. There's all sorts of stuff you can interact with, like both in locomotives and carriages. Like, oh, I don't know, if you want to open up your smoke box, how cool would that be? You select that, you drag it open, and you're good to go. There's some really neat stuff. If you want to open up passenger doors, that's something that is also possible. You want to spin knobs and dials inside the locomotive cab, you can do that. Let me actually... I don't want to go too deep into the code because I know a lot of people's eyes glaze over when I do that too much. But I want to show you how simple it is to add this interaction. So this isn't something that just I can add because I know how the deep inner workings of immersive railroading are. But if we take a look at... I believe I put it in locomotive. Yes. So all you have to do is implement, well, there's two things you need to do. One is update the model, which I'll show in a sec. The other is implement something like onDrag. So for components that when you drag them, they need to update. Actually, I think you kind of need to do this for everything, but there might be a generic one that you tie into. It's going a little bit too deep into it. But effectively, you say, when this component type, which the modelers will be familiar with this list of all the different groups that are recognized, when this type of component is moved by this amount in the x and y directions, or x and y percentage on the screen, this is how you should modify these things. So if you move the throttle, it sets the throttle with a minimum of 1 or minimum of 0, maximum of 1 by that amount, and factors and all of that other nonsense. But that's all the code I needed to add to the whole entity stuff for that to work. And the way you define those in the locomotive is, if we go to locomotive model, it's this right here. So you do throttle equals control.get, and I'll make a more generic thing so it's not just controls, but you get the picture. So you get this provider, these arguments are always the same. And then you get the model component type. So you could add model component type window, and then that will automatically recognize all your windows. And then what you do down here is, all you have to do is render it, giving it the values from the entity. So I'll probably add something so you don't have to, for every single thing, have a value that's set back and forth, and have it, if it's not automatically done via something like throttle or reverser or air brake, it says, okay, it's just something that you can toggle, like a window or some other random thing. Let's see. Admiral is asking, will there be a comprehensive write-up for adding these controls? Yes. So I'm kind of torn on whether I want to write up like documentation. So some stuff will go on the wiki. I should work with some modelers and actually build up the wiki for how you build rolling stock and make it interactable and all that. But actually updating the code, I may either link to this, or probably next week's stream when I go over what this looks like in more detail, where I plan on adding support for doors and windows and that sort of stuff. I'm thinking a video tutorial where I can just kind of talk along might serve that purpose. We'll see. Again, leave feedback either in Discord or in the chat here. But other than the stuff behind the scenes, that's all I had to do, which I think is pretty cool. And the code that actually drives this is really not that complex. I need to work a little bit on, like, not necessarily the targeting code, but figuring out, like, if I move this side to side, the reverser probably shouldn't move, but I might do something with looking at the axis, and then figuring out how to interpret the X and Y changes, even though that changes it a little bit depending on where you're standing and all this other stuff. So I'm happy enough with the initial implementation. It's a little bit janky, but it's usable. Ooh, I got some thunder coming in. So hopefully I don't lose power and lose the stream, but yeah, this is working pretty well. Yeah, so that's primarily what I've been working on so far. Do you guys have any additional questions in the chat? So I just love sitting here and playing with this stuff. It just feels right. The one thing I wish I had added is like a whistle you can click and drag, because that, like, I mean, right now I've got the whistle key, but that's not the same thing as actually pulling on the whistle. Time set 0, there we go. Okay, Admiral's another question. Speaking of brakes, will there be train and independent brakes? Funny you should ask that. Let me pull up GitHub. That is actually, so, Dark's been working on the stock reorganization on and off for a couple months now. Primarily what I want to get out of that is the cab car stuff. So he implemented cab car one way, I implemented it a different way. We need to sit down and take a look at what the advantages are of one versus the other. Because there's a lot of questions about like how to organize stuff so that makes sense code-wise. Both implementations will work just fine. It's just as we add stuff down the line, which one's going to be easier to maintain. So cab cars will likely be in the next update. I got to chat with him a little bit more this weekend and throughout the week, and we'll figure out something that works for both of us and makes sense going forward. The independent brakes, I ended up doing that in a slightly different method, but that actually works right now. And what I would like to do is actually merge independent brakes into this, so when you hop over onto the locomotive, these independent, like right now this lever doesn't do anything, but having the ability to move both the train brake and the independent brake at the same time would be fantastic. Yeah. So hopefully I'll get this merged in, and then get that integrated with integrated controls. And the independent brake, I think if you're not using these two individual controls, I'm just going to gang to the brake keys, because I'm already using way too many keybinds for immersive railroading as it stands right now. We'll see. So that was Admiral's follow-on. Multiple ways to blow a whistle. Again, the rotate, translate, and I think screw might be another one, like rotate and move. Rotate and translate, but we'll figure that out. But yeah, it would still kind of be nice to be able, like, when you push a button, you actually push the button, which would be fun. And Evan has a question. Something I was wondering was, immersive railroading add crossing signals. That's something that I kind of want to have part of other mods at this point. I've considered it for a while. So this is a good segue into some of the other stuff I want to work on. So if I go back to this, one of the things on the list. Sorry, cat needs snuggles for a sec. Be back in a sec. Okay, hi buddy. Hey, Happy Bear. I know, I was away most of the day. Okay. The support for animated parts, that will make implementing stuff like crossing guards and switch levers easier. But let's see. Implement structures, that's the one. So, yeah, so this is something I created back in 2017, back when this was first starting to get off the ground. And we ended up shelving this work because I added the augment system just to get something, and the augments have worked well enough just for the basics for now. But it's honestly, 2.0 might remove augments. I'm not 100% sure on that. And again, 2.0 is going to be quite a ways away. I don't like removing features if I can help it, but augments are something that have always been a hack. What I might do is remove the ability to craft augments and remove them from the user interface. But if you have a world with augments, it should still work. I think that's kind of what I'm leaning toward. But again, this is probably a year or so down the line. So I've chatted with Wrong a fair bit about structures and how they want to work. And when I wrote this was way before resource packs were as big as they were. And what I think I want to do is implement this through resource pack. So the default stock will have, or the default mod will come with the rolling stock basics and a couple structures, like just some of the stuff in here. So like all the stuff that augments effectively do right now. And probably keep those pretty basic, reasonably small, and then effectively anyone can create a resource pack that would be able to specify a custom structure out of whatever blocks they chose, using like or dictionary tags or things of that nature, in a particular structure, and specify the input and output points and its function, and power requirements if such, and stuff like that. The way this works now, and I promise I'll get back to some of the other chats that are happening, but it's really not that much of a stretch given what's in here now. So if I go into, where's my multi-block code? Multi-block. Yeah, this is a pretty simple one. Well, casting? I'm just trying to find a good example. Yeah, these are all kind of generated procedurally. This is, yeah, Steam Hammer. This is a good example. So it's effectively a three-dimensional array, so to speak. Hi, kitty bear. Where you specify, okay, lead engineering block, air, steel, air, lead engineering block. And if you've ever built a Steam Hammer in Immersive Railroading, you know that's the first layer. So lead engineering block, air, steel, air, lead engineering block. So this could be put inside of a resource pack, and the model could be put inside of a resource pack. And things like the output slots and the input slots, that all goes into that sort of system. And I think it's achievable. And I think this kind of got off topic for the question that was asked, but for crossing signals or stuff like that, I may do crossing signals at some point, and if I do, a system like this for adding them would make sense, where you have a resource pack with like a JSON file where you define the three-dimensional recipe for the multi-block. You right-click on it like you do with any other IR multi-block right now, and it forms into the model. And you could potentially use this for things like stations and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I think that's something I do want to get to within the next couple months. Oop, hey kitty, you're falling. You're falling. Hi, you're good. Okay. Yeah, so that's implement stars, and folks haven't voted on that yet. So I'm going to try and clear out a lot of stuff here first before I start picking from some of the stuff that's lower on the list. So, yeah, okay, going back to the chat. So yeah, crossing signals, maybe someday, but I like relying on other mods. But if someone adds an add-on mod and they want to tie into this multi-block system, that would probably be pretty cool. And with the dragging mechanic, you would just be able to manually drag the crossing gates up and down. That would actually be kind of neat. Okay, Tom asked a question. Does all the braking force come from the loco right now? What about train brakes while running versus manual brakes when individual wagons are parked? So that goes to this right here. So this effectively, I don't think I actually committed the change. But really, all that a modeler would need to, excuse me, all that a modeler would need to do, oh, I did commit this. I probably shouldn't, I got to revert that before merging. But all they would have to do is in the properties set independent weight to true, or independent brake to true, and that would allow you to turn on or turn off an independent brake on that car. So this will work for both locomotives and random pieces of rolling stock. So the trains, the locomotives by default, if you're not using the in-cab controls, will set both the independent and train brake. But if you're using the actual in-game controls to drag stuff, you'll be able to set the two separately if the modeler has added support for that. And let's see, and yeah, so for individual wagons, if you set that, if the modeler sets that to true, then for things like cabooses or brake vans, you can actually do some actual braking there. Yeah. Though, and Admiral, that's not entirely true. The way that the brakes right now are actually train brakes. The locomotive, there's some hand waving for how that actually works, but the way the system works prior to all these changes is it looks at the weight of every single piece of stock in the train that's coupled to the one that's running the simulation, and says, okay, there's this much force on the wheels, the brake pads can put this much force into the wheels without melting them. Therefore, depending on how hard the brakes are put on, this is how much braking effort that can actually be applied. If that makes sense. Yeah, so there's definitely some cool stuff happening there. Let's see, what else is open in a... Yeah. Okay, so there's some PRs that I want to get to. So I've talked a lot about new features and stuff like that, and I'll keep taking questions in the chat, in the comments. Actually, so I'm actually going to take a quick look in the Patron Discord. Let's see. Admiral also asks, configurable lighting distance, dimmable headlights. That, I think, could be... That shouldn't be too hard to add. The question is where I would add it. I think locomotives, the actual in-gate, like when you right-click the interface that shows up, is going to look a lot different. I think I'm going to add some buttons and controls there instead of trying to add a keybind for everything. It's nice to have keybinds for the stuff that actively, like, you're working, you want to hit, but stuff where you're parked and you have a sec to take a look at, oh, I want to toggle this, or I want to turn on the running lights or the headlight, or however you want to do it. That also brings up another thing that I'm kind of thinking about in the background with the advanced controls, is with advanced controls, having a reverser gives you a lot of control. So being able to move the reverser back and forth, or effectively to whatever setting you want, is cool, but that also has efficiency complications. I need to just put a bed down. Okay. So right now, locomotives are coded such that if you're burning every single slot in the firebox and you have enough water, you're generating just enough steam to run the locomotive at full tilt constantly. That makes sense for the controls that currently exist, but with reverses into the equation, if you're familiar with steam locomotives, the faster you go, the more you actually want to back off on your reverser. Because if you're... the reverser effectively controls both the direction of travel, and it also controls for how much of the stroke you're actually putting steam into the chamber. And if you're going really fast and you're putting a ton of steam into the chamber, you're wasting a lot of effort, especially as it gets toward the end of the stroke. You still want to be dumping as much steam in as you can during that portion of the stroke to hammer on the rod. But effectively, I want to change it so that you actually have to start pulling the reverser back at speed. And eventually, I think I'd have to ask Krieg, because he's my expert on all things steam locomotive maintenance and physics. But I think that'll actually do damage to your locomotive if you're running it with the throttle full out. Please, someone who knows more about trains, correct me if I'm wrong. But efficiency-wise, it makes sense to have to pull back on the reverser as you get to speed in order to maintain boiler pressure. So the way the boiler pressure is calculated right now, if anyone who's hot-fired a locomotive, where you put in one bucket of water, put in a bunch of coal, let it heat up really quick, and then dump a bunch more water in, that's bugged me for a while. And a lot of the physics in the game are really bad. Anyone who knows actual physics has looked at my code and gone, dude, what? And there's open pull requests that are modifying the physics that I haven't gotten around to because there's so much precursor work that I want to do before that actually goes into effect, because there's so many bad assumptions throughout all of my code around physics. So what I want to do is start piece by piece starting to replace that. And one of the first places I want to do that is boiler physics. So right now the boiler actually knows roughly how many joules it's burning in the firebox based on some hand-wavy math around Minecraft coal density and stuff like that. But I also want to say, like, okay, you have this much water, which is generating this much pressure given this many joules as input, it's losing this many through radiation, and it's losing this much pressure through stream, which changes the vapor pressure and all this other nonsense. I may end up approximating it, but I do kind of want to get it to the point where the boiler physics are at least a bit more realistic. Let's see. Okay, Chris MS, actually good time to ask. So Chris MS is asking about documenting this stuff, effectively a white paper that includes all of the equations. What I'd like to do, so right now the physics is scattered throughout probably 10 to 20 different files and probably 100 functions, which means that modifying physics in one location breaks it in a bunch of others. So what I want to do is start breaking out all the physics into its own package inside of Immersive Railroading. Again, this is still bundled with the mod. This isn't a separate mod, to be very clear. This is just a separate code organizational area. Like, it'd probably go under the physics label. You can think of it as. So I segment my stuff into, like, items go in here, and inventory management stuff goes here, and stuff like that. User interfaces go here. So I'll probably expand the physics package where the physics will be independently testable outside of Immersive Railroading, so that someone can take a look at that code, read through it, understand the units, understand what's going on. It's not going to be simple, but it's going to be well documented in the code how that actually works. So for people who want to do a lot of automation, and even with advanced controls doing some of the automation, I think that's going to be super helpful. I also am hoping that once I start reorganizing this stuff and add the basic hooks, other people can do some research and help me fill in the blanks. Because I just barely passed Physics 1 in college, and I don't think I got through Physics 2. I don't think I had to take that, but my physics knowledge is fairly weak. If anyone who's looked at Immersive Railroading's physics can tell you, it's not the best, but it could be a lot better. So my plan is to start breaking out bits and pieces of physics into its own and separately testable area that people can fiddle with and modify without having to deal with the whole craziness that is the rest of Immersive Railroading's code. I mean, I've done a fairly good job to break it into individual pieces where it's understandable, but as a whole, trying to grok the physics system is, at this point, it's a fool's errand. And I want to change that. And I think that'll clean up the code quite a lot at the same time. Let's see. I was looking at something before this. Oh yeah, starting to look at, yeah. So talking about that. So my rough plans for the next release, and again, very malleable, but I want to get something out within a couple of weeks so that people can start seeing actual tangible progress. So I want to get the initial version of the in-game controls written up. I want to get a very basic, at least a very basic implementation of the lighting set up and ready to go. I want to hopefully chat with a few modelers to get several, especially the steamers, because that's where a lot of the fun is. Get the steamers set up so that you actually have the in-game controls and can do some of the really neat stuff there. One thing that I need to work on, I've started doing some research, but I haven't honestly spent as much time as I should have on this, is the permission system. This is something that anyone who runs a large immersive railroading server knows needs to happen. The hardest part about this is going to be figuring out what mods to interact with and where. So I've done some research, asked a bunch of the server owners what permissions plugins they use, how that interaction works, and I think the initial version of this will require a third-party mod for this to work. Again, very tentative thought. And in future iterations on this, have the ability for Immersive Railroading to have a more nuanced permission system. Again, this is all very, very tentative, but that's what I want to work on in the coming week or two. So wrapping up some of the animation stuff, getting that fleshed out to the point where I can put out a test build for people to play with, and then really dig into this stock permission system. Because I know that's bothered a lot of people. Admiral's asking which mod. At this point, I don't know. What I'd like to do is support as many as I can, and that's going to change via the Minecraft version, which means the support is going to need to be added to Universal Mod Core and then ported between versions. So yeah, I've got to figure all that out. So that's going to take some time. I may probably spend a whole day or two in the next week or two really just diving in and just spending 6-8 hours just sitting down and getting that functional and usable. And I'll iterate with the server owners that run reasonable sized servers to get feedback on that and share prototypes with. And of course everyone in the Patron chat already. So that's kind of what's on the agenda. Some of these others, some of the easier ones, like this one I can knock out in a handful of minutes. So that I think will come in without too much trouble. This one will likely wait until the next iteration, the dynamic cargo visualization. I'm excited to work on that, but it's a fair amount of work to get working correctly and performant, so I think I'm going to hold off on that until the release after. And again, releases hopefully will be every few weeks. At most a month and a half is what I'm shooting for. And then start working on some of this other fun stuff like locomotive and car sway. And I think we have... Yeah, there's all sorts of fun stuff. In the early game machine's basic progression, that also ties in with implementing structures. So I think these will probably happen at the same time. Well, I may not implement structures, but I might implement... Whichever one comes first, I will implement the new resource system so that people can create alternate versions of the existing multi-blocks via resource packs. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but it should be doable. Because that's effectively how it'll have to happen in Immersive Railroading to start. And any existing multi-blocks will continue to work. That's something that I want to make happen. Again, one of my biggest goals with Immersive Railroading, as should be seen to the fact that I port to 1.7.10 on a regular basis, is that I don't like breaking backwards compatibility. I haven't actually tested it, but you should be able to go back at least to 1.5 and load up IR in 1.10. And if you've got a world that started probably even in 1.0, you should be able to incrementally upgrade that version to version and should still work in the latest releases, which I think is pretty cool. So what I may do is say 2.0 is a hard limit and say, okay, load up your world in 2.0, load all of the chunks, and then further iterations beyond that, I'll start removing some of that old functionality that is old and crufty and doesn't make sense. Because the track has been rewritten several times, and there's a lot of code that is built around the assumption that it can port from those old versions to the new versions, which makes stuff a little bit more janky than it needs to be. But yeah, I'm planning on definitely having these, probably having this. Blowdowns, I don't think that's going to happen in the next one. It might, depending on how crazy I go with Boilerphysics and injectors and that sort of thing. Again, all this will be designed around the idea that the ease of gameplay that exists today will continue to be the default, but you have the ability to easily opt into more advanced, more realistic controls to the point where it's almost a full-blown train simulator. That's kind of my end goal for some of this stuff, is to be able to not necessarily rival some of the more popular stuff out there, but really put up a fight. Yeah. So that kind of covers what's on the Patron board. As far as what I want to get out of the next release, I've been thinking about that a fair amount. The one thing that bothers me is the cache size for Immersive Railroading is actually fairly large, and it's not ideal. The reason the Immersive Railroading cache exists, if I haven't laid this out clearly before, is that loading JPEG images or PNG images off of a hard drive is very, very slow. Like, at least an order of magnitude, possibly 2 orders of magnitude. Like, it's 10 to 100 times slower than reading the raw reading the raw data. So, but you also run into hard drive speed. So what I've done is implement a cache system so that I don't use PNG compression. I use an actual, what's called LZ4 compression. So I read the textures into memory, recompress them. So I read the textures into memory, put them into a giant texture sheet for every locomotive, as small as I can possibly get it. Scale it if I need to based on the graphics card, and then I take those resulting pixels, which are in the format where they could just be tossed into the graphics card to render at that point, and instead of putting them on the graphics card, this is during the boot up process of Immersive Railroading and why it takes so long the first time, is... Oop, I just heard my UPS click, so hopefully I'm still streaming. So it takes that image, and at some point I should add a webcam because I'm drawing images in front of me, but also would mean I need to get a lamp because it's kind of dark in here. Anyways, I'll think about that for the next stream. Maybe if I hit like a certain amount on Patreon, I'll add a face cam and cat cam for streams and that sort of stuff. Leave your feedback in the chat and comments. No, just like, sorry, visually, like I'm drawing pictures in the air with my hands. So you've got the pixels in memory. You've read the images. You figured out where they need to go eventually when they go to the graphics card. And instead of them writing them back to disk as a PNG image, I write them back to disk as the raw data. But you can actually figure out how big that would be. So if you go, let's say if your graphics card supports up to, what's 1024 times 16. So that's, most modern graphics cards support textures up to at least that big. So that times 2, because it's in 2 dimensions, 2 megabytes. That's actually, oh, sorry, right, but this is also times, and that's bytes, so that's actually, so that's how many pixels. 16 bits per pixel. Yeah, so I think that's a half a gigabyte right there for some of those images. If my math is right, and it's probably not. But long story short, the raw uncompressed data is huge. But what I do is I use LZ4 compression to reduce that by several orders of magnitude in most cases, and I get it back down to something that's reasonable on disk. So I've done some experimentation, and if I do some hacks in the graphics card, I might, and it might reduce the graphics performance by a little bit. I might be able to get the actual render performance, or the actual on-disk cache. If I'm really optimistic, I might be able to cut the size in half. So you might go from, like, if you have a bunch of packs loaded, go from 3 gigs down to 2, 1.5. So leave some comments in the stream if that's something you think I should be working on. I'm kind of debating because it's kind of tilting at windmills to a certain extent there. But if a lot of people are having trouble with the space requirements for the cache, that could be a problem. One of the things I need to do, which I should really do for the next release, is change around the cache format a little bit so that it's smart enough to know how to delete old versions of files. Which would mean it'll have to regen the cache and all that. But right now, when you update a model, or when you update, actually that wouldn't be too bad. So right now, when you update a model, or you update to a new version of IRs, or rather Universal Mod Core, sometimes if the underlying code changes, or the underlying models change, instead of removing old stuff from the cache, it just adds more cruft. So if a modeler is sitting there working, changing model, booting Minecraft, changing model, boot Minecraft, it can quickly balloon the size of the storage required for UMC. So I need to fix that, and I think it's not that bad. So I'll probably fiddle with that over the next week or two, see what progress I can make. And one thing I wanted to do is start working on coupler physics and that sort of stuff, but I think given all the other changes, I kind of want to get the in-game interaction and the top couple patron stuff released, and then for 1.11 actually dig more into the, like, deeper into the physics, deeper into the coupling, deeper into the packet storms that get sent back and forth for stock movement. I know it's actively a problem, but it's going to take a while to fix, and as soon as I start going down that road, it's going to break a bunch of stuff. And I'd like to get the advanced controls in first. So that will likely be a 1.11 change and not a 1.10 change, but we'll see. As far as what else I have planned is I'd like to get back to Fabric support. And I may also work on Forge 1.7.10 support because it's technically released and a bunch of people are porting to it. It'll take folks a while to get everything up and running, so I might hang off until Immersive Engineering. I'm curious. Let me check. Just because a lot of my multi-blocks and functionality don't depend on it, but they work a little bit better if IE's around. What's master now? Do they have a development branch? Let's see, branches. GitHub pages. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, so it looks like they're still on 1.16.5. I don't know when they're planning on. I'm going to guess someone opened up an issue. It's going to be a little bit. Yeah. So I may or may not wait for IE, but I've actually already done the UMC port for the most part. I haven't tested it, and that takes most of the time. But 1.17 isn't that bad. There's some stuff that they break with tile entities and blocks that is going to be a problem, and I still need to find a way to hack around that, but it shouldn't be that bad. I've abused code worse in the past. But there's some assumptions that happened in Universal Encore. The bigger thing for 1.17 is if you've tried loading immersive railroading in new Minecraft versions, in new Java versions like Java 16, it does not work. It breaks in really weird and unpredictable ways. And that's because I do some really horrible things to Java to get some of the nice-to-haves working under the hood. I can fairly easily remove them. I just haven't done that yet. So when 1.17 comes around, I'll have to rewrite parts of UMC, not drastically, but just go through and audit some code and change a few things around. But honestly, removing that hack will be good. So 1.17 might be on the list. Depends on how other stuff goes and how testing on these features go and people updating models and that sort of thing. The other thing to consider is Fabric support. I've wanted to get back into Fabric support because honestly, it's in a lot of cases it's easier to mod for. There's less stuff that's forge breaks. So Fabric support is something that I've thought about for a while. Uh-oh, that's glitched. There we go. Oh, no, my graphics card is not happy. That's fun. So leave a comment down below or in the chat of what priority you think Fabric should be. Philosophically, I enjoy working on it a lot more, but Forge definitely still has a fairly large following. But Fabric is a lot easier to update to newer Minecraft versions. It's almost I'm not going to say trivial, but it's a lot closer to trivial than Forge is. So I've made some progress. I need to make more progress. There'll need to be testing, so we'll see. I mean, doing that stuff is not exclusive, but it just depends on where people's priorities are as far as new Minecraft versions and that stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's other stuff I wanted to cover today. I've been streaming for about an hour. Normally I'd like to probably try and stream a little bit longer, maybe do some actual more significant in-world gameplay, but at this point I've kind of showed off everything that I've done so far. Hopefully there'll be even more next week with doors and parts and all sorts of cool nonsense. But I think I'm going to hang out for a few minutes, see if anyone has any other questions in stream, in the chat, and yeah, after that I'll probably sign off and do another stream next week. Again, if you want to be part of these streams and ask live questions and get exclusive access to a lot of the thought process of what's going on and a lot more of the prototype stuff that I'm not as comfortable showing in development until it becomes more fully realized, or in some of the other chats. Supporting me via Patron definitely helps with that, and you'll get access to a lot of these exclusives depending on how much you chip in. And yeah, I appreciate everyone's support. This is making my life a heck of a lot better right now. I've gone from a job that I couldn't stand and really couldn't sit down and get the motivation to work. Was pulling so much motivation out of me. I was having a hard time really doing anything outside of work meaningful. And this is really, like, my quality of life in the past week has gone through the roof. And the more that patrons can support me and make this amazing mod possible, and the more people who get in on this, the longer I can spend days a week just plugging away at Immersive Railroading, doing bug fixes right off the cuff, getting people test builds as soon as they need them, and building new functionality as quick. I'm not going to say, I almost said as quick as you guys can dream it up, but I've seen the suggestions chat in Patreon or in Discord before, so I'm not going to say that. But as some of the modelers and people in Patron chat can attest to, when I'm on and working, it's almost live feedback as stuff comes through. So if you want to get in on that, hop on Patron. Access to this, I currently have it set to $2 a month. For the first couple weeks, I think I'm going to have give everyone who has Patron access live access to the stream. I may even get rid of the $2 tier and say everyone who's at least chipping in $1 a month gets access to all the stuff and some of the chats. If you end up donating more, the $15 a month, I haven't been doing the live dev coding and interaction streams as much with the higher tiers, but what I have been doing is when they start chatting me, I'll just hop on a one-on-one call and we'll chat about the feature. I'll go through the code, go through what's going on, talk about what they're looking for in detail, and what the highest priority parts of the feature are, and kind of go back and forth from there. And if you want to become a patron and what you see is not on the list, shoot me a message, and we can talk about getting it added to the list. There's some stuff that I'm hesitant on adding, so I'm happy to chat about that stuff ahead of time. But yeah, reach out and let me know. Let's see. Anything else I want to cover? Yeah, just a huge thanks again for everyone who's supporting me directly, and another big thanks to all of the modelers, all of the hard work that they do. Anyone who's developing an add-on for this game, I have a huge amount of respect, huge amount of appreciation for the work you guys do. I would have not even been able to consider doing anything as crazy as what I'm doing now with Patron without your help in making Immersive Railroading what it is today. So hats off to you guys. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to end the stream, and I will likely be publishing this stream. I'll be making the link public in the next day or so. I'm still figuring out how I want to do the timing on that, but yeah, it should hopefully be published not too long after I stop recording. So thanks again, and I'm going to sign off. See you next week.